I had a rather terrifying experience with one of these large Doberman Pinscher-looking creatures that you called Dogman when I was only 8 years old. When I was a little girl, I had this beautiful Labrador retriever named Sassy because she was always a very spunky dog. She had an almost sassy-like attitude, hence her name, and she was my best friend. That goes without saying. My mom and dad lived a bit out in the countryside, and we had this beautiful creek not far from our house that I spent a lot of my time playing as a little girl. Me and Sassy went on evening walks often. Being a little kid, I loved being out in the forest. I even set up several hammocks out there so I could sit with my dog and read my books and enjoy the sun and summertime. This evening, I was stopping to look at a bug that I had never seen before, while Sassy ran ahead of me to the creek. I usually stop her and tell her to wait, but I figured she was just as eager as I was to get in the water. After all, it was a pretty hot and humid day. The creek was just beyond this little hill that we were by, so I couldn't physically see her, although I knew where she was going. A few minutes go by, and I'm intently looking at this weird caterpillar-like bug. Looking back, I think it was just a type of millipede. My 8-year-old self, of course, never saw one before, so I was deeply intrigued. I began hearing my dog whimper and cry out, and water splashing. So I run up the hill where I can have full view of the creek in front of me, and I behold the sight before me. I see this giant Doberman Pinscher-looking creature standing up, holding my dog under the water, while she's gasping for air, flailing, and fighting for her life. This thing was easily double my height, and I remember it being extremely muscular and having tufts of gray and black hair all over its body. I also remember it having a mane around its head, if that makes any sense. The eyes were a dull amber, but they did not glow, and I never saw its teeth. It must have been holding my dog down with tremendous force, because my dog began vomiting up blood while underneath the water as it struggled for her life. I ran towards it in such a state of panic and fear for my dog. My 8-year-old self didn't care as I was running headfirst into a monster. It nonchalantly glanced over at me as if I was just a mere ant to a giant. It wasn't even fazed. It looks back down to my dog, presses even harder, and that's when I heard a cracking sound. I don't know if it broke her neck or her skull or what, but she became lifeless after that fluid motion. It pressed down on her hard, cracking her skull is what it sounded like to me. In another single fluid motion, it leapt up behind her, up in the trees, and was gone. It disappeared just like that. This all happened from my run to the top of the hill to my dog, which is probably only 50 feet, if even that. It happened so fast that by the time I got to Sassy, she was already dead. Her eyes had rolled to the back of her head, and she was lifeless with her head still in the water. I pulled her out and cried for probably 3 hours straight before returning home and telling my parents what happened. Her neck had been broken, her skull had been smashed, and she had drowned. Of course, they didn't believe me and thought I was making it up, and so I was severely punished by my father, and he beat me. I was never allowed to have any more animals after that, because my parents were convinced that I drowned our dog. I just remember crying out, and explaining to them I'm not making it up, but they wouldn't hear me out. Every time I would bring it up, my dad would get so angry and smack me across the face with his belt, making sure his buckle would be sure to hit me, and usually cut my mouth open. That was his idea of punishment for lying and killing our dog. Everybody in the family loved Sassy, so it wasn't easy for anyone. Of course, all the brute emotions landed on me and were taken out through my physical punishments. As if I wasn't already suffering enough emotionally, I was the most attached to her. She was my dog after all. Moving aside from what my parents put me through afterward, I never paid any heed or any real attention to cryptids or dogmen altogether until much later on in life, when I was told about the Michigan Dogman by a friend. I ended up picking up a book about it by Linda Godfrey. After venturing down that rabbit hole a little more further, I quickly was able to put A and B together and I realize now that what I had seen was a kind of one of these things that she talks about in her books. I have a question for you. Have you ever heard of big black wolves in Arizona or the southern United States? I have some close cousins that live on the southeastern side of Arizona. After speaking to them, they want to keep their identities and their location as private as possible. So, I'm trying to reveal as little information to you as I can, while also trying to be as informative as I can. My cousins are half native, and the area that they live on has a huge coyote problem. Not just for them, but the surrounding community. They are constantly having to pay people to come in and take care of them every year and dwindle down their numbers because they go out to their livestock and cause a bunch of issues around where they live. This year, however, my cousins were telling me about this pack of wolves that stood upright and were killing these coyotes left and right. I didn't think wolves even lived in Arizona, but my cousins were telling me about these large black wolves that stood up on two legs that would rip through these coyote packs like paper. They would find dead, torn up coyotes around where they lived, and one evening, they stood outside because they heard a bunch of commotion coming over a small ridge in a nearby valley. After running to the top of the ridge and looking down into the valley, they saw these three large black wolves attacking and viciously ripping apart and eating this pack of coyotes. They never even heard a coyote scream like that. They didn't know what species of wolf attacks and devours coyotes. These wolves are easily 4 times the size of these coyotes. In the last few months, they've been hearing weird howls that don't sound like coyote howls. Coyote howls are very distinctive, and when they're howling together in a pack, it's unmistakable. This other howl was something very different. Right away, they were telling me how amazed they were by this animal's lung capacity, because the howl went on for probably 15 to 20 seconds, and had so much power and vibration that they could feel it, or so they said. They only started hearing these noises rather recently, and the coyote attackings have been very recent too. My oldest cousin believes it's a territory war between these wolves and coyotes. Since the coyotes have been in this area for a long time, it is the same large pack. That large pack is now severely dwindling down. I don't know anything about this stuff, as it's not my forte of information, but I thought I would start reaching out to people like you who seem to have a background on strange things. If you can shed some insight, or possibly give me some answers, I would really appreciate it, because they themselves are scratching their heads, wondering what's going on. Their biggest worry is these wolves can tear apart a pack of coyotes like that. What will they do to their own livestock? Or even worse, them. They've tried to do some research on their own, but they can't find anything about black wolves, or black wolves that stand upright. To their knowledge, these things are strictly nocturnal, and do not hear or see them at all during the daytime. But during the dusk and nightfall is a totally different story. They're the most active in the early morning, from what I've heard from them. They've even gone as far as bringing in a medicine man in the local area to bless the area of the house, assuming it might be something more than just a large predator. Possibly a skinwalker, or something along those lines, but it doesn't seem to have the characteristics of a shapeshifter, or a person who practices magic. This is what they told me. I'm not really knowledgeable about these kinds of things, as I said. The medicine man, after blessing their property and area around their house with the livestock, told them that this was not a skinwalker's doing, and was something much worse. He told them that they are in grave danger, and they need to retreat from the area. My cousins are freaking out, because they don't know what to do, and they're afraid to even shoot at these things. Their livelihood and business is at stake. The good news is that these wolves have not tried approaching the house, or going after the livestock at all. Their only interest for right now seems to be the coyotes. To give you a base of time, this has all been going on in the last couple of weeks. The time that I'm writing this to you is June 30th, 2020, and this has all been within the last 2 to 3 weeks that this has all transpired. I live as a caretaker for my father up in northwestern Washington state. My father is very old, frail, and he doesn't have much time left. I'm working on spending as much time with him as possible before it's his time to go. Hence why I've sacrificed much of my young life to care for him and to be there for him. Much of his passion was hunting, especially duck hunting and fly fishing. We used to spend so much time together when he wasn't sick. We would spend days at a time out roughing it in the wild, and he would show me all sorts of things. How to track small game, what to look for, being upwind and making sure game couldn't smell you. All of the essentials for being a competent and well-rounded hunter. My uncle, my dad's brother, being only 7 years younger, has come to live with us due to his failed marriage and him wanting to be there for my father's last days. He too is a rabid fan of duck hunting, probably more so than any other form. This story isn't about those things though. This is something much more spiritual in my opinion. This occurred this last December during duck hunting season. My uncle comes home early from a day of duck hunting, and I noticed he doesn't have anything with him. He's also moving quickly, like he's on a mission, and noticed that he's looking a little panicked. I was watching him through the window before he even came into the house. He gets in the house, and he is white as a sheet, and has this look on his face like he almost died. Before I go any further, we live near a very marshy area where there is ample grasslands, perfect for waterfowl hunting. Getting there is only a very short drive away, and we're very blessed in that sense. Back to the current story. So he comes in, and he is visibly shaken and pale. Before I can even get my mouth open to speak a word, he starts asking me if he has ever seen a large German Shepherd before, walking around the marshes where he just was. I gave him a strange look, and told him no, I didn't know what he was talking about. He was about to land a shot when this German Shepherd dog stood up and shot out of the marshes and grabbed a hold of this duck and took a bite out of it, eating literally half of it, and then looked over at my uncle and gave him an evil grimace, exposing too many sharp teeth for a dog to have. Even the expression in its eyes were pure evil. I really wasn't sure what to say or how to respond when he told me this. My uncle isn't really bothered by a whole lot, and he is definitely not the fearful type. For him to be this visibly shaken and terrified spoke volumes about the truth of what he was telling me. When I tried to ask him more questions, he seemed like he was having a rough time responding and going into more vivid detail. He kept reiterating the same points, that it looked like a large German Shepherd that appeared out of the water and was clearly standing on two legs. It reached over and grabbed the duck he was aiming at like it was nothing, grabbed it and bit it in half with its teeth. Then it looked over at my uncle, exposed its razor-sharp teeth in the most wicked, evil way. It's like it was mocking my uncle and inviting him into the marsh at the same time. Deep down, I think my uncle knew that it was not a dog, because dogs don't stand on their legs like that, nor do they act like that. As soon as this thing looked at him and made eye contact, he could just tell that this being had intelligence and was much more than a dog. Due to its physical appearance, he really had nothing else to go by other than to chalk it up as a German Shepherd. When he asked to elaborate more on the whole German Shepherd appearance, he said that's what it resembled the most, that it was very shaggy and unkempt, like it had been rolling around in dirt and muck. Maybe this thing lived in the marshes. He wasn't sure. He did say though that he firmly believed it had intelligence. It smiled at him, and all he felt was an evil emanating from this thing. The teeth that he talked about weren't like a dog's either. This thing had more reptilian-like teeth, lots of tiny razor-sharp teeth filling its mouth. It didn't look right. It was almost dinosaur-like, he explained. After I extracted as much information out of him as I could, I think he called it quits for the rest of the day and retreated and stayed in the house. I wasn't really sure what to make of it at first. On one hand, I did believe him because he's not a liar and he was too physically affected that it would have happened. On the other hand, what he described to me was so far detached from this reality, I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it. That is, until this thing started coming up to our house. Over the next month, my father's condition would worsen, and it's as if his health was this roller coaster, ever moving up and down. There would be moments at night that you would just feel this evil presence surrounding our house. Even though we would have porch lights on, and sometimes you could see pretty visibly well and everything around the house, there was nothing. No eyes watching us. No person visibly standing anywhere that we could see. But you could feel it. It was so thick, you could cut it like a juicy steak with a knife. It's a combination of fear and being watched. And not just being watched. Like whatever is watching you is calculating its next move on how it's going to get you and drag you out of the house. That's the best way I can describe it. It was truly terrifying. At that time, though, I never thought about the encounter my uncle had. In fact, I had forgotten all about it. I wasn't sure what to make of the feelings I was having. When this would go on, my uncle was never home because he was working a job where he worked night shifts. These feelings only occurred randomly in the evening and night. It always seemed to happen as my father slept. As I progressed into February, I began to hear tapping and knocking on the glass. It wasn't like finger tapping. It was like the nails tapping against the glass. And then there was that horrible scraping alongside the house. It was like somebody took a board with a bunch of nails in it and drug it slowly along the siding. This would happen early in the morning hours when most of us were asleep. It was always accompanied by that horrible presence that we would continue to feel on and off. As we got later into February, I, for the first time, thought exactly what it was. It is to the T as my uncle described it. Until that moment that I saw it, I never paired his story with what we were experiencing around the house on random nights. I never told any of my family or friends about that, because I didn't want them to figure or think I was having severe schizophrenic hallucinations. Once I saw what it was, my mind immediately brought up my uncle's sighting, and it was like one big click in my head. I've seen it multiple times since this, but the first night I saw it came out of the trees, stopped, and looked around as if checking that it was truly and fully hidden. It was still winter, so there was a bunch of dead trees where it came out of. From my view, I just watched this massive black shape, blacker than the darkness around it, move slowly out of the trees and into the open. That's when I made out the definitive shape of a 9-foot-tall werewolf-looking creature that appeared very German Shepherd-like. I watched it then creep up to the back side of our house, right where my father's bedroom is. There was just enough light from where our extremely bright porch light was, where I could see enough detail that I knew exactly what it was. It really did resemble that of a large, upright German Shepherd. Very shaggy, thick, nasty matted fur. I saw the snout and other defined parts of his body, but I never saw any teeth or anything like my uncle did. I've also never seen it during the day. The first time I had a glance at it, fear overtook my entire being, as I was partially confused as to what animal this was. But then I realized it was something different altogether. Whatever it is highly drawn to my father, as it keeps going to his side of the house, where his room is. Is this a werewolf that came from the marshes we're dealing with here? I always thought about werewolves and knew they were a myth, and that they didn't exist. Perhaps I was wrong. My uncle has now had more experiences with this thing, with this occurring on nights that he is off and home. My dad spends much of his time sleeping and doped up on pain meds, so we really don't have the guts to tell him there's this 9-foot-tall, walking dog stalking your window. My uncle has tried shooting at it before, but it's like this thing doesn't even fear guns. It's never tried to break into our house or show my uncle and I any threat, but just seems to be attracted to my father. This has been ongoing since, and the reality is that there isn't many new things to share. My father is still struggling for his health, and it's slowly declining. I don't know how many more months he has left, but it can't be too long. We're all prepping for his passing emotionally and physically, and this nuisance, whatever you want to call it, keeps making its appearance very often at random times during the evening and night. Then, To say I'm beyond terrified is an understatement. We are tormented by this thing, and we don't know what to do other than to cower and hide like little scared children. I've started reaching out to people in hopes that I can get some answers on how to deal with this. Why is it so attracted to my father? Is it going after him? Is it wanting to kill him? My uncle said he had watched it at night, and it just stands there by my father's window, watching him as he sleeps. It's very creepy. To answer your question, no, we have not tried calling the police because we know where that would get us. Blown off and blacklisted. With all the rioting going on right now, I feel like our situation would be the very last thing on the totem pole of importance. Part of this is written to you out of desperation because I have no idea left what to do. I don't know what this thing's intentions are, but I know deep down they can't be good. If it was, we wouldn't feel its evil presence every time it makes itself known. The other part I'm writing to you is because I just want answers. Please, help me in any way you can. Thank you. I used to practice black magic and occultism very heavily. I was even training to be a master warlock, casting demonic spells on people, curses, and casting spirits onto individuals, the whole shebang. I would spend more time worshiping Satan and fine-tuning the harnessing of demonic energy than most American Christians do praying to God. My roots with Satanism and black magic ran deep, learning when I was just a child because of such an abusive upbringing. This also in part led to a severe heroin addiction, which would later kill me. I was so angry and bitter at everybody and everything around me. It wasn't until I was after 18 that I got involved with summoning demons and physical manifestations of darkness. One of these manifestations is what you talk about in your episodes of Dogman. These are demonic creatures, summoned and maintained by other controllers of darkness. Much of the demonic realm is allowed to take physical manifestation and shape when people of darkness are able to do correct rituals to allow them to breathe into this realm. This is why their characteristics are all hellbent on terrifying and hurting those they go after. Don't be fooled. It is very often that these things are assigned to specific individuals for a multitude of reasons. Many agnostics and atheists increasingly undermine the power of the demonic realm and what it is capable of to a non-believer. Luckily, I no longer serve the Lord of Darkness. See, when I served Satan, I was under the impression that when I died, I would go to hell and take part in reigning in his hellish kingdom. But after overdosing on heroin, I was taken to hell, and I came face to face with the very same beings I was summoning and casting out onto people. I became the tormented and suffered great agony before Jesus saved me and gave me a second chance. This is no joke. One of my common practices was astral projection, the art of your spirit leaving your body, and I was getting good at it, so I knew for a fact when I was outside of my body. My spirit left my body, and I entered into the dominion of hell, ready to hold Satan up to his promise of allowing me to reign over part of his kingdom, when he laughed at me and told me he deceived me just to get me here so I could be tormented forever. It was then that I was locked into my own hellish cell, where I was tormented and tortured by the same demons I summoned and manifested against others. At the time, I hated God and anything to do with God. I hated Jesus and anything to do with Christians. But for some reason, the name Jesus came to my mind, and in my darkest moments of torment and unending agony, I cried out to him and asked him to save me. He appeared to me. As a practicer of black magic, or a previous practicer, I never understood why there were certain people of Christ I could never attack, and it wasn't until I became a believer myself that I now understand how powerful the blood of Christ is. I'm not trying to go too in-depth on my change of heart and my movement away from dark magic, for I am now serving the true King. Even though this event is a large part of why I have to tell you what I do, the purpose of my writing to you is to inform you that these dogmen that you write about, that you read about, and hear about, are all a part of the demonic realm, There is no good cryptid. I know this because they operated in this realm of magic, or I control these beings and was their handler for a long time. With that said, I also want to confirm to you that yes, these beings do have authority over certain individuals to kill them, harm them, or terrify them, depending on the spiritual protection they have on their life. There are many instances where I've heard reports where people go missing after being attacked, or they're just plain out not there anymore. These beings take them and kill them. Same with much of the 411 individuals that go missing that are obsessed with. Because I had so many brothers and sisters who operated along my side in the demonic realm, helped bring these beings from the abyss and hell out onto Earth. Many are dying this very day by the same cryptids, and it's being covered up because the government knows what's going on. You would be so shocked if I told you how many government and military officials have their hands deep in the pie of occultism and serving Satan. They are all a part of the master Luciferian plan set aside. This is not a work of fiction. I know all of these things because I lived it for years and years. Masters of the dark arts are also great at masking our work. Remember, the best way you can trick your enemy is to make them think you don't exist. Why do you think we were able to have so much power over people? If the general public is convinced it's just a bunch of silly magic and doesn't do anything, then those people are the most susceptible to being controlled and manipulated to our bidding. People who truly walk with the blood of Christ were literally untouchable. And there were times I would become furious at the spirits I cast, because no matter what I did, they could not be touched. On the same coin, there are many quote-unquote Christians who do not walk in the spirit and are just as susceptible to the demonic manipulation that I practiced. These are what I call lukewarm Christians, or people who haven't fully given themselves over to Christ. They live one foot in this world and one foot serving God. They're usually seen by us as society as hypocrites because they don't truly follow Jesus. These were some of the individuals that I was tasked with going after. I would be sent into churches, and Satan would point out to me specific individuals that were weak in their faith that I needed to send demons after. I would conjure up these physical manifestations, cryptids, and torment them. When I say demons, many would interpret that as cryptids because that is a lot of what these demons would take physical form as. Even though this information is important to share, I hope you read this to your viewers and share it with them. It is important for them to know, and I have to keep my identity hidden, because even now, you don't just change out of the darkness to light without having a massive target on your back. Many of my previous colleagues are still out on the hunt to kill me for turning to Christ. But if I can inform the many, then that's what's most important. So if you can take away anything from what I've told you, is that beware of cryptids and things like Dogman. They are demons and works of Satan and his minions. They are evil manifestations, and there is no such thing as them doing any good. If you truly do have the blood of Christ, then there is nothing they can do, nor any power they can put over you. If you get involved in the wrong things, the wrong crowd, the wrong walks of life, these beings will set out to come after you and reveal themselves to you, to terrify you, torment you. And once they reveal themselves to you, you are spiritually marked for more attacks. This is why many claim to see one, and then continue to have reoccurring sightings. There is a reason. I hope this has been informative for you. I can share with you much more, but I'll stop for now, so this doesn't turn into a mini novella. If you do decide to read this to your viewers, they need to understand that this is real, and these things are very powerful. If they are not believers in God or the demonic realm, they need to understand that there is power in Jesus, and that is the only thing that's going to save them. Take care.